shadows of history.
In the early 1970s, Manila stood at the center of growing political tension. Student movements, labor protests, and public demonstrations filled the streets with thousands of voices demanding change. What appeared on the surface as political unrest was also something else, a living laboratory where scholars and authorities observed how crowds behaved when emotions, pressure, and political conflict collided. For psychologists and political analysts studying crowd dynamics, these moments offered rare insight. Large groups often behave differently than individuals, and the streets of Manila were becoming a stage where anger, solidarity, and fear spread rapidly through thousands of people. Observers began asking a question that would shape decades of research. How exactly does a crowd become a riot? Some researchers later suggested that the events unfolding in Manila were quietly studied as a real-world case of crowd psychology. This idea would later be referred to as the Manila Crowd Test, a term describing attempts to understand how mass behavior emerges in moments of political tension. In January 1970, Manila entered one of the most volatile political periods in its modern history. A wave of demonstrations known as the First Quarter Storm began to unfold across the capital. Thousands of university students, activists, and workers gathered in massive marches demanding reforms, economic justice, and accountability from the government. What began as organized protests quickly evolved into a powerful movement fueled by frustration and rising political awareness among the country's youth. As the protests grew larger, confrontations between demonstrators and police became increasingly common. Lines of officers stood in front of government buildings, while crowds of protesters shouted slogans demanding change. These tense moments revealed how quickly collective emotions could spread through a crowd. A single chant or confrontation could ripple through thousands of people. For sociologists and political observers, these events offered an unusual opportunity to witness mass behavior in real time. Large crowds do not simply react, they amplify emotions. Anger, hope, and fear can move through a gathering like waves. In the streets of Manila, analysts began noticing patterns, how leaders influenced direction, how tension escalated, and how thousands of individuals could suddenly act as one powerful collective force. As demonstrations expanded across Manila, some observers were paying attention to more than the political demands of the protesters. Sociologists and behavioral researchers watched the crowds carefully, studying how individuals behaved once they became part of a massive gathering. In large groups, personal hesitation often fades, replaced by a powerful sense of shared emotion and collective purpose. Scholars studying crowd behavior had debated these dynamics for decades. Many believed that emotions could spread through crowds almost like a chain reaction. When one group began chanting or reacting with anger, the response quickly traveled across hundreds or even thousands of people. These emotional waves helped explain why demonstrations sometimes escalated rapidly without clear leadership directing every action. From above, the movement of large crowds often resembles a living organism. Groups shift direction together, surge forward, or compress into narrow spaces. During Manila's demonstrations, observers noticed how small triggers like a speech, a chant, or a confrontation could suddenly alter the movement of thousands of people. While journalists reported on the political conflict unfolding in the streets, other observers watched quietly from rooftops and office windows. From these elevated positions, analysts could observe how crowds formed, expanded, and shifted across different neighborhoods of the city. Their goal was not to report events, but to understand how large crowds behaved under pressure. Observers carefully recorded the timing of specific events during demonstrations. They noted when crowds began chanting, how people reacted when police appeared, and what moments triggered sudden changes in mood. These notes helped researchers identify patterns that appeared repeatedly during different protests. Inside quiet offices away from the streets, analysts compared their observations using maps of the city. They tracked where crowds gathered, which routes demonstrations followed, and which locations produced the greatest tension. These discussions slowly revealed how the design of urban streets and public squares influenced crowd behavior. Most demonstrations began with speeches and banners, but tension often grew slowly as crowds expanded. Protesters gathered energy through chants and emotional speeches, while police prepared defensive lines around key government buildings. As both groups faced each other across narrow streets, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Psychologists have long noted that confrontations between opposing groups intensify emotional reactions. Within a crowd, individuals feel supported by those around them, which can reduce personal fear. This shared confidence sometimes encourages actions that individuals might hesitate to take when standing alone. During several demonstrations in the early 1970s, small confrontations escalated into moments of chaos. A push at the front of the crowd could trigger movement across hundreds of people behind it. Within seconds, a peaceful gathering could transform into a rapidly shifting wave of motion. One of the most powerful forces inside any crowd is emotional contagion. Humans instinctively mirror the emotions of those around them. When excitement spreads through a large gathering, individuals begin reacting in similar ways, raising their voices, moving closer together, and responding collectively to what they see and hear. Chants and slogans often act like signals that synchronize the crowd. As voices repeat the same words again and again, individuals feel connected to a larger movement. This shared rhythm strengthens the emotional bond between participants and increases the overall energy of the demonstration. Observers studying Manila's protests noticed that once emotional unity formed, the crowd often began moving with surprising coordination. Thousands of individuals who had never met each other could suddenly act as a single, organized force. Authorities closely monitored these demonstrations and prepared strategies to maintain order. Police units equipped with shields and protective equipment were positioned around important government buildings to prevent crowds from entering sensitive areas. During moments of heightened tension, additional security forces were sometimes deployed to reinforce police lines. The arrival of military vehicles was intended to demonstrate the government's readiness to maintain stability. Public announcements through radio stations informed citizens about curfews and safety measures during large demonstrations. These communications were part of broader efforts to control unrest while preventing unnecessary escalation. The events unfolding in Manila quickly became a subject of discussion among scholars studying social movements. Universities examined how large demonstrations could reveal hidden psychological patterns within societies facing political pressure. Researchers studied photographs and newspaper reports to reconstruct how demonstrations evolved during the day. By analyzing these materials, they attempted to understand how crowds reacted to speeches, confrontations, and rumors. These debates contributed to a broader academic effort to understand collective behavior. The Manila protests became one of many historical examples used to explore how crowds respond during moments of political crisis. Decades later, historians continue examining the protests that shook Manila in the early 1970s. These demonstrations remain valuable case studies for understanding how political movements grow from small gatherings into massive public events. Visual records allow researchers to analyze crowd movement frame by frame. They study how people gather, how tensions rise, and how quickly large groups react to unexpected events. These historical analyses remind us that crowds are powerful forces in shaping political change. When thousands of voices gather in the same place, their collective actions can alter the direction of history. Today, scientists use advanced technology to simulate the behavior of large crowds. Computer models allow researchers to predict how people might react during emergencies or large public gatherings. These insights have influenced modern approaches to managing demonstrations. Authorities now focus more on communication and crowd guidance rather than confrontation. The demonstrations of the early 1970s revealed something timeless about human society. Crowds are not simply chaotic groups, they are reflections of shared emotions, frustrations, and hopes. Hidden within those crowded streets were lessons about how collective behavior shapes history. If you want to explore more forgotten investigations and hidden historical stories, subscribe to Shadows of History and uncover the past from the shadows.